There's 4 terms that you have on your website. There's and one of them is resilience. So how do you define? Let's go through all 4 of them real quick. How do you define? I'll hit each one, but let's start with resilience. What does that mean? How do you define it, and how do you build that?
Yeah, resilience. I guess it's the ability to withstand difficult situations and thrive through them. To some degree. It's the answer to how to build resilience in yourself and the people around you is obviously a long-winded answer, but I think it started with my own observation of my own family history, which was my grandparents lived through the Armenian genocide and watched their whole families massacred. Both my grandma and grandfather were basically the sole survivors in their family as children and were orphaned and all that. What I didn't know my grandparents because they died before I was born, but I knew all my 11 aunts and uncles, and they were just such happy, bright people. And it only struck me later in life that this is only one generation removed from the most terrible circumstance I can imagine. And I thought, how was it that my grandparents that went through so much horror were able to raise children that were like happy, the joyful? What was funny is I didn't even really know who had done what to our family until I looked into it later. It's not like my aunts and uncles or dad were just like, oh, the Turks did this or that. Yeah. It's not what we focused on. We focused on creating a family and a life for ourselves. And I thought that was that struck me.
Yeah.
I also spent a lot of time reading war memoirs and, various books that put in perspective my own suffering and just knowing my own family history, what other people have been through. It kind of gave me a foundation for resilience, that could have resilience. So part of resilience is having that perspective that allows you to put your own suffering, within context.
That's good.
That would be one part. Another part of resilience is strong relationships, like understanding that when you're going through something that there's people there for you on the other side. When I went on alone, which we haven't discussed yet, but a lot of people assume that's, mine must have been the hardest thing you've ever been through. That's, explain to me that. And it really wasn't hard. I can just honestly say it wasn't hard at all. Like it was, and part of that was because I had gone to Russia prior a lot. Yeah. I had been away from my family for years at a time and come back and understood that, these people still love me. These relationships are still secure. And we'll catch right back up. And what I've learned in the outside world will not only enrich myself, but those people that I come back to. And so having that perspective on, that I'm on alone, it made it 3 months out in the woods seem fairly,
that's, what a great perspective though.
Right.
And, so, one of the kind of I guess you call it like a core tenet of this podcast, like a better life and the tribe that we have and all this stuff is, I say this all the time, is find people in your life who make the impossible look like a Tuesday morning. Right. And this is such an example of that, where it's like, when I think of survival or just being resilient, going out and, like self-sufficiency, all that, I just think of how horribly difficult that sounds. And so the whole idea of the show is let's get around people who we can be like, hey, that's easy. So I love that you said that. It just kind of confirms that.
Interesting.
Because if I may never be you, I may never go live in Siberia and go ride reindeer, though that sounds amazing. I can be a little more like you by learning for where's that mentality come from? So resilience. Awesome. We got ingenuity. Yeah. Second word. What does that mean?
Ingenuity, I guess that's just the ability to dwell in a creative mind space. And what's interesting about ingenuity is that I don't consider myself a creative person. I score pretty low on creativity on those little tests and stuff. I'm not an artist or a musician. But something struck me, and this struck me particularly while I was on alone, is I kept being confronted with these problems, various problems, and I had to, on the fly, think of solutions. There's nobody else to rely on. It's either you figure out your problem or you die, in my mind. And so it was a great catalyst for creativity. And it was funny because I started to, whether you're coming up with just a simple string with cans attached as an alarm system, or building a fence to funnel moose in this direction or that direction. It's like all these solutions you're coming up with, trying them out, seeing how they fail, seeing how they succeed, and then iterating on them and continuing forward. And I thought out there like, wow, I feel like a creative person. You know, like I could see where the seeds of creativity developed in humanity. And I was like, oh, that's super interesting. So kind of the key, I guess, to allowing yourself to be creative is to, as I've put it before, is to kind of dwell on the edge of your aptitude. You know, like, of course, when you get the invite to go on this show and try to survive with nothing out in the woods, you're like, I don't know how that's going to go. Yeah. You know, it sounds a little nerve-wracking, but you know, just push yourself just beyond your comfort zone. And the more you do that, the more you're going to have to live in that space that fosters a creative mindset, because you're going to be struck with all these problems that you have to come up with solutions for. And this nice thing about wilderness living is those solutions are usually fairly simple, to be honest. You know, it's like, oh, this stick falls on that stick. And, you know, this, whereas, you know, sometimes in the business world, those solutions can be a little more convoluted, but it's well,
I wonder how much of that is life and death, though. You know what I mean by like, you have to be creative when you're out there surviving. Right. And in business, it's just way easier to just lay in bed and scroll your phone instead of thinking that idea.
Absolutely. It's you're absolutely right with that. Like it's really easy to just live in, of course, our modern world has provided us with every comfort. We're not going to starve to death. Nothing's wrong. It's another reason why that really struck me when I was alone out there, because there's nobody else to rely on. You really, no one else to blame if it doesn't work out well. So yeah, you're forced to figure it out. And if you can try to understand that there's a lot of inertia against that in the modern world, you know, you can hopefully counteract that to a degree. But
excellent, man. All right. Third one, adaptability.
Adaptability, I guess, I guess we'll relate it to the show. You know, when I got out on the show, had a real clear idea of what I wanted. The whole reason I signed up for the show is I'd watched the early seasons, seen everybody had bears around and their camp. I was like, why aren't they hunting bears? This is crazy. And so I'm going to sign up. I could do that. And then you sign up, and I, had my whole plan, what I was going to do, catch fish, shoot a bear, blah, blah. Got there and there were just no bears. And then I was fishing, couldn't catch any fish. And all of a sudden your whole plan has to shift and you have to adapt. But I think a key to that is just not being afraid to fail. You know, it kind of ties into, I think, that ingenuity. But you don't be afraid to try new things. Don't be afraid if it's a screw up, man. You know, and then just learn from your mistakes. One moment that stood out to me was, if you watched a show, at one point I'd worked for weeks to try to create an interaction with a moose. You know, like because that's what I saw. A moose sign. I didn't have bear. I didn't have anything else. So needed to make an interaction with a moose happen, and I had put my shelter down. I'd done all these things to try to make that happen. Spent hours calling them, and then one day I come out and there's a giant moose like 40 yards from you, and I go out there with my bow and took the shot, and the arrow goes short. I was like, oh. And then I turned around and I didn't have my arrows because I'd grabbed my camera instead, and I was just like, oh, I'm an idiot. But immediately in that moment, it was interesting because you could get really upset. Yeah. But what I did instead was I noticed, I just immediately took it all in. Like, wow, that was incredible. I feel like I saw a dinosaur, giant moose. What can I learn immediately, and how can I make this happen again? You know, now I almost felt like now there's more pressure for me to, succeed in interacting with a moose again. And so I watched where he went, took note of that, followed his tracks, was immediately aware of like, I'm not going to be like, dang it, I missed. Be quiet, follow over there, see where he went. And that's when I saw the it's probably 300, 400 yard funnel, area in the forest they went through. And I was like, man, I could build a fence here, and immediately start thinking of new solutions to the problem and just adapt to whatever happened. But to do that, I think you need to expect failure and be ready for it when it comes, so that it doesn't knock you off your feet,